backup and recovery. Okay, everyone's talking about it. So, but we were talking about a while back ago, and we weren't really talking about backup and recovery. You were talking about business and business users getting access to the information that was archived. And I was like, but that's not a backup. Okay, it is, and it isn't. But I just thought it really, really interesting. So, with that in mind, can we start there? And can you give me a little bit of a background to that for the benefit of the audience?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is software is eating the world. So with that being said, it does create some problems for the business, especially when you have customers that are doing reporting, or they want to perform analytics, or they want to make some use of that data. So the business challenge is how can I democratize data, data that we've retained, data that we've archived, to other parts of the business without stressing the production system. So you might be wondering, like, how does this even apply to backup and recovery? But actually, the interesting thing is, it actually sits at the center of that discussion because, and we can talk about this, how can we make that data that's normally compressed and inaccessible much more valuable to the business?
That was what caught me was it's archived, it's inaccessible, and only to be retrieved in edge cases, not on a day-to-day basis. And when you started talking about that, I was like, oh, this is very, very interesting. So, and because I'm having other conversations around secondary storage costs, reducing your storage costs.
Well, yeah, and like you said, it's normally considered an edge case, but I think that customers and clients in general need to think of value multipliers around their data. So as it sits in the database, which is right, it's uncompressed, it's fully available, and it's on more expensive storage. But what about data that resides that's retained and archived and that's sitting out there? Like you said, is it only useful in the edge case, or can we make more utility out of it in a more continuous manner? So this is where other stakeholders like developers, analysts, and folks like that, even managers, are going to start to reap the benefits. Um, so at a highest level, right? But it's making more utility out of the actual data that's sitting in a backup file.
So, in terms of that particular organization, that I think it's fair to say we can say it was in the legal vertical. We won't mention any names, but
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting as well. In terms of it wasn't just regular data; it was I suspect it was case law, etc., etc.
Yeah, it was actually that. It was case research data, and the trade-off for them is they wanted speed and efficiency, like Dave had mentioned. So what they were doing was they're saying, okay, fine, we're not going to retain it or archive as much. But the problem becomes is it was strapping their production systems, and what they needed to do is release the pressure off of that because you still have case research that needs to be done. So what happens is the business or the analysts themselves are now constrained because they have to work inordinately faster, but for really no reason, right? There's all the time that they have to do the research. It's just can they be capable in that manner? So the trade-off then is should they retain more, but then is it expensive? Is it still efficient? And what they
Right.
found out is there are ways to access data that's in compressed form, sitting out on secondary storage, which is a lower cost, and still make it available to those folks for reporting purposes. And like Dave mentioned, you're not so overburdened in this criticality with the size of your database, because now you could look specifically at the data that you need. For example, it could be tabular data. Dave mentioned, right? It could be megabytes in size, but it could be ultra critical to the test. So
Yeah.
you have that ability. Analysts can look at certain rows, in this case, that match the characteristics of a specific case that's being researched. They could pull that out. They don't have to worry about all the other data that really isn't relevant at that particular time. So,
You know what? I was just about to say this, where when you restore something, and
mhm.
Dave, you talked about this before, I think, where you're just about to restore something, you don't need to restore the entire thing. You can just pick out elements, tables, objects that you want to restore. You don't have to restore the entire thing. And that means you're saving a whole host of time But I imagine there's other benefits by having that functionality.
Sure. So oftentimes you don't need to restore the entire database, but depending on the software or solution that you're using, you may be forced to do just that. And therein lies extra time and extra space required to do that restore. With the concept of something called object level recovery, you can restore just the object that you need. So, as an example, maybe someone accidentally dropped a critical table in their database. With some solutions, you'd be forced to do a full database restore, and time consuming, as well as taking up a lot of space, right? With object level recovery, you can recover just that object, just that table from the backup file, saving both time, minutes instead of hours, as well as that storage space.
Yeah, it offers a lot of assurances to the DBA. I think the biggest assurance that Dave and I always like to, I was going to say reassure, but to like to emphasize is this notion of control. And when you talk about, Dave actually mentioned this earlier, I hope everybody caught this, but you back up because you are proving to your organization your restorability. But that's what oftentimes gets taken for granted. And the reason why it gets taken for granted is because, for example, testing restores, there's an expense around it, right? How do I test a 1 terabyte restore, multi-terabyte restore? You need to have a place to restore it to. That's expensive. It's also expensive in terms of its time and effort. So these are the reasons DBAs won't come out and say it, but these are the reasons why testing isn't performed as often as it should. Now we have this notion of protecting our tier 0 assets. Now, database servers, generally speaking, might not always be in tier 0, but they are very critical to the organization.
For sure.
So why don't we ask our clients and customers how much of that downtime costs their business? So in other words, having assured restorability, having the ability to to be accurate in your restore, and to be able to have scalability. Dave, wouldn't you say these are all assured aspects of control for the DBA?
DBA-centric necessities.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes where solutions that maybe aren't database-centric fall short. On the idea of control, DBAs find themselves losing control with their own SQL Server database backup and restores if they need to use one of those all-in-one backup and restore solutions that backs up everything, the database, the host, the hardware, and so on.
Yeah, the enterprise backup solution.
Yeah, I was going to ask because I don't know this, and I have a question for Amin after this as well because he just said something and I actually don't know the answer. With those enterprise level backup, do you restore everything, or what you said before about the object level recovery? Can you do that with enterprise backup, or no?
I would say more often than not, no, you can't. But even if you could with those types of solutions, those that control that software are less concerned about that. They're looking at the bigger picture, the larger enterprise, the entire environment, whereas the DBA is focused strictly on the database, and they want to have that control over their database and have capabilities that make their job easier, make themselves more efficient, and give them the insurance that it's going to be done correctly and accurately and quickly.
That's safety net, yeah.
So, you want to be able to prove that your restores work. You want to be able to get granular with an object level recovery, or even get more granular. Maybe somebody dropped 10,000 records when they meant to drop 1,000. Doing things like being able to traverse the transaction log to get just that particular data back via an undo redo is critical, is super important to the DBA. Whereas the IT administrator using that enterprise level backup it's not even on their mind.
But I was like, what's the alternative? If you don't have that capability of that, just that one line item, undo redo option, what's the alternative there? You're restoring the entire database at that
That's
snapshot, or
that's the
That's the
alternative.
alternative. Is a full database restore.
And I wanted to
wow.
add something here just to kind of paint the ultimate value perspective, right? So outages are on the decline. And so DBAs and administrators are definitely getting better at keeping systems continuous. However, and I jotted this down, 32% still to this day are experiencing what we call high business impact outages once per week. And then if you further that
Sorry, meet once per
yes,
week,
once per
30%, a
week.
third, once a week.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. A third are saying that it's still happening once a week. This what we call a high business impact outage, and then the other thing is outages are still expensive. So a majority of them will say that 1 hour actually equals roughly six figures. Whether it's low or high, this is where they're drawing that line. So when you get back to this, the level of criticality, and Dave mentioned this earlier, the prioritization that's needed. The level of criticality should determine the type of control that you need in your backup and recovery strategy. Simple as that. And this is where this is where having this type of granular mechanisms for recovery are going to allow organizations to improve their what do you
Yeah.
call their response time objectives, the recovery point objectives, and then they can even blend this into other enterprise strategies, for the
And
overall backup in the enterprise.
I mean,
I
you
was going
bring
to
up
say,
a good point with numbers, and numbers don't lie, and what you just shared with us is obviously going to perk up the ears of all the executives when it comes to the bottom line and dollars, right? We hear all the time of every environment or every company or every IT department needs to meet their SLAs, their service level agreement, that the database was available 99% of the time. Well, let's take that number, 99%, or the opposite, 1%. Well, 1% of a long time is still a decent amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we could throw out numbers and then figure out what 1% is. But when we do that, you'll find that 1% is probably not acceptable either. So
that
you pretty
1%,
much need
sorry,
to
I'm
be
just doing
up
the math in my
all the time.
head. That 1% of 365 is 3.65 days.
You did it right
Did I
there.
do that right?
Yeah, you're doing it right. That's
Uh,
99%. If you were
yeah,
99.9%, you would still be conceding several hours in the year.
that's a lot over a year. 3 days
Yeah.
is a lot for anyone not to have access to a mission critical application. And I would say there's a very high chance of data loss there as well.
We have our friends at Microsoft, which won't be named, but we have our friends in the vendor community that are all still shaking their head. So we have a huge community of SQL Server personas that are out there that every time we talk about this capability, this granular and restorability, again, all the focus will shift back to the vendor, kind of waiting to see if this capability will arrive. And still, and we're in 2023, we're not yet there. So this is a great chance for practitioners to go out there into the independent software vendor community and find these answers. And the thing is, the innovation is there. It's
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And we're coming to the end here, and I just wanted to highlight that this isn't a case of either or. This is a case of both.
Right.
And in terms of a business case, these things are not expensive, but they offer the benefits of assurance and productivity that the cost far is far below the benefits that received.
It should pay for itself, to be quite frank, right? Just in the
100%.
fact that you're able to utilize data that's in a compressed form. So there's those 4 points that we had mentioned earlier. All of those equate to economical factors for the business that are generally positive.
Yeah. You were talking about a very large database, and how do you test that restorability of a very large database in testing your disaster recovery plan or restorability? Um, that takes a long time. I genuinely don't know the answer. Do you have to restore the entire thing and say, yes, that restore works? Or is there a different way to do it to save time?
Well, I'm going to expand that a bit because it brings to mind sort of why we even take full backups in the first place. So I think the question should be asked, or the consideration should be, do we really need to take full backups as often as we should, or as often as we are doing? So the example is when you look at the change rate of data, it's really important to know whether databases are changing aggressively or not. Now, these days, things are changing aggressively, faster than they ever have. But should you be taking a full backup, like say every day, when you could be utilizing differentials? And then only take the full backups when a certain change ratio is found. So for example, we'll only take full backups when we've reached, let's say, 35% or 40% change from the last backup. But oftentimes, our clients are just taking full backups every day with very little or minuscule amount of change. And what's happening is it's unnecessary. It's taking up more storage than needed. So I think when you start to plan out a restore strategy, yes, you'll want to know how fast you could restore your entire database. In fact, our Lightspeed solution actually has analysis features built in that will tell you what you could expect if you perform your backup under a certain array of settings. So that will relate to speed, that will relate to size, that will relate to a number of factors that allow you to judge the success of your strategy.
So you
But to
can
your
choose your
point,
trade-off. If you're more important about speed, you can actually configure based on that.
well, also the other thing too is that not necessarily you have to test the entire backup to know how well it performs. Let me give an example. With Lightspeed, you could tell it, I want to test the backup against 20% of the data. Or you could give it a actual amount or the size that you want to perform. So what it does is it works with a percentage of the data in the database, and it gives you a prospectus. It'll tell you that based on this percentage, this is what you could expect. So then you could start to amp it up a notch, right? And decide if you want to now do this against the entire set of data. But this still doesn't get back to my point. When you have this ability to smartly use differentials in your backup approach, you're inherently saving space, because now instead of taking full backups every day, you're using those differentials wisely. You're still giving yourself the recoverability, the granular recoverability that we had mentioned earlier in this entire conversation. But it's that ability to save space on the front end, meaning as you create the backup files, this is helping organizations save tremendously. Okay. And remember, a lot of our organizations are still caught up in this thing of being compliant. They should always take full backups more than periodically, but is it really necessary? So this whole thing that we're doing at Quest, Dave and I, is opening up people's minds to the possibilities of what's already there. This isn't anything that's new. It's just reopening the possibilities to more control.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's exciting to see people's reactions to it.
And I gotta say, look, I'm not a DBA. I can look at a query and make it out, but I gotta say, my example is I'm a Windows guy, in my Windows Explorer, and I'm taking backups of my folders, and I'm taking a backup of a folder, another backup of the folder, because I haven't gone in to see what files have changed. I don't know. I'm just going to take a copy of it. And it sounds to me as in that's a really bad strategy, and I should use some software to save myself some time and space on my backup. That's a really poor analogy.
It's very fitting, and it left us speechless. It was so good.
But you didn't answer the question though. If you have an 8 petabyte size database, you've got other problems, to be honest. An 8 petabyte database, how do you test that disaster recovery of that database? Do you just leave that to the enterprise object backup, or do you have to sit and wait for the entire thing to back up and say, yeah, my disaster recovery plan works?
Yeah, that's basically it. Is whatever settings you put together for your backup, to your point, you're going to have to let that run to observe and see how well it performs, and then you might have to run it multiple times, different times of the day, to understand when is the best time. So Dave mentioned it, right? You have a backup window, but you don't necessarily have a restore window. So this will help you understand what type of window you might have to create, because you're going to set your recovery time objective based off of that.
Okay.
So that's how everybody's doing it right now. The other question is, how often are you doing that, right? Because just because you restore 1 terabyte 1 month doesn't necessarily mean it's going to perform the same every month. So this whole notion of being able to rinse and repeat the restorability is a very much a factor in the success of a DBA, especially under the critical pressure of being out, right? And then we talk about what Lightspeed can do on top of just what DBAs have to do to stay on what we call par excellence, right?
Okay.
On par with being a good DBA, tending to the needs of what we call a continuous business, right? You should be testing your restores.
So Dave, quick question, and I'm going to wrap it up shortly.
Yeah.
So Dave, quick question. How often should DBAs be testing that restore of their databases? Is it every day or every week or every month or once a year?
Be one of those "it depends" answers, right? But it indeed does depend. Now, at a very basic level, there is a validation process you can go through to make sure that backup file is not corrupted, and then you can also make sure that it's there and not deleted or moved. So with basic validation, you can have some level of confidence that it's going to restore. But to extend upon the idea of feeling comfortable with your backups and that they're restorable is doing an automated restore, and just schedule it, say once a week. That should potentially be sufficient to give you the peace of mind that it is indeed restorable, and show management that, hey, all these backups aren't for nothing. If we ever have that situation where we need to restore, I'm showing you every week with this automated restore job that I have set up in Lightspeed, that it can be done.
Now, is there such a thing that offers what we've just been talking about for the last few minutes? Is there?
Can I say it? Can I say it?
Is there? Is there a magic wand, Dave?
Indeed, there is.
Tell me.
Quest offers a
Yes.
solution called Lightspeed for SQL Server.
Excellent, excellent. And we didn't want to be product focused in this conversation. These are real life scenarios, real life considerations, and components that I suppose domain-based challenges. And it just so happens that yes, we do have a product called Lightspeed that really helps solve a lot of these challenges that both Amit and Dave have been talking about. Amit, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to ask the same question to Dave in a few minutes. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to leave for the viewer?
No, I would just say I think that this is a great conversation, and I think we should continue this conversation. There are multiple levels and depths to it, but I think you should always ask, right? Why are you backing up? That's really it, and it's really because of your restorability. So don't take that for granted. Take some of the things that we had mentioned today under consideration, and understand that you have the choice of flexibility. You're not this is not a choice of one over the other. This is a chance to embed something, as Dave mentioned, for your most highly prioritized and most critical sets of data.
And Dave, any last thoughts?
I guess I'd just say similarly, for backups, you usually have a window that you do those types of administrative tasks. For restores, you generally don't have that option to just do it when it's convenient. And so you want to make sure that you have a solution that provides flexibility and granularity with your restores so that they can be fast, they can be efficient, they can be granular and specific to what you need from that database.
Great. Okay. Very wise, both of you. Thank you so much for your time. It's very much appreciated. And I look forward to the next time we speak.
Thanks for having us.